Chapter 9. Charles did not care about the mocking comments on his Instagram story. Now that his lot in life had changed, so did his perspective. Most people could not care less about what an ant did, precisely because they could squash that ant with a single fingertip. Please come again. At the door to the automobile store, the manager and all the employees saw Charles and Deidre off. The two of them drove straight to the Jonestown Bay mansions because Charles wanted to see how the renovations were coming along. After all, he was eager to bring his parents over to live a life of luxury. Meanwhile, the automobile store employee drove Deidre's old car back to her place. In the Jonestown Bay Development Zone general manager's office, the general manager, Ron Scott, stood nervously in front of his desk. He barely dared to even breathe too loudly. The problem was the man in his 50s sitting in his seat. He wore a branded suit and looked extraordinarily dignified. This man was the chairman of the Jonestown Bay Development Zone, Hans Jansen. "So, Mr. Scott, how are the company's sales going lately?" Hans asked. "They're going great. We even sold an entire block yesterday," Ron said with a laugh. Hans immediately looked at him in disbelief. "Are you joking, Mr. Scott?" Hans said crossly. "If I remember correctly, the most anyone ever bought was 2 units. Who could possibly be rich enough to buy an entire block in a day?" Ron said, "The person who bought a building was a student." Pfft. Before Ron could finish his sentence, Hans spat out the coffee in his mouth. "A student bought an entire block here? Mr. Scott, do you even hear yourself?" Hans looked very displeased. It was already hard enough for him to believe that someone could buy an entire building. How could he possibly believe that the buyer was a student? This was no ordinary building. Every single unit was a luxurious mansion, and each one cost tens of millions at least. Buying an entire block would cost billions. How could a student have so much money? Hans immediately thought Ron was pulling his leg. If Ron did not give him the perfect explanation right now, he would not hesitate to get rid of him. "I'm not lying, Mr. Chairman. Everyone in the company has heard the news by now," Ron explained in a hurry. "If you're so sure, bring me the paperwork." Hans sneered. "Mr. Chairman, Deidre was the one who handled this case. I'll bring her immediately," Ron replied. "Deidre? Deidre Chase?" Hans considered the name. She was the most promising employee in the company. At barely even 27 years old, she had already become the manager of the sales department. She was very capable. Hans was already planning to train and raise her. Now, Ron was telling him that Deidre had managed to sell an entire block in one day. If it was true, then he had to promote her as soon as possible. If it was not, then he had to fire her along with Ron. "Bring her to me at once," Hans commanded. Ron took out his phone and called Deidre's office. "General Manager, Miss Chase isn't here. She didn't come to work today," the staff in Deidre's office said in a panic when she received the call. "What? She didn't come to work? What is she doing?" Ron was furious. The chairman was back, and he demanded to see Deidre, but she had not shown up for work. How was Ron supposed to explain this to the chairman? "We really don't know." The employee in the sales department office was so anxious that she was about to cry. Ron could only hang up helplessly. "What's wrong?" Hans noticed something amiss with Ron's expression and asked quickly. "Deidre didn't show up for work today," Laurel explained awkwardly. "She didn't come to work? Where did she go?" Hans roared angrily. "What kind of general manager are you? The sales manager didn't come to work and you didn't know? Are you colluding with her to trick me?" Panicked, Ron hurriedly reassured him, "Chairman, would never lie to you. If I do, I'll die 1,000 deaths. Hans' expression softened a little, but he still barked coldly. What are you waiting for? Call her back to work. Ron immediately nodded. Yes, of course. Ron immediately took his phone again and dialed Deidre's private number. Just then, Deidre was driving back to Jonestown Bay with Charles. After receiving the call, she immediately asked curiously, "Is something the matter, General Manager?" "Deidre, where are you? You're the sales manager, but you didn't come to work. Do you have any idea how serious the consequences are? Come back to the company immediately. The chairman is waiting for you." Ron reprimanded into the phone. Deidre immediately apologized. "I'm with a client right now, sir. I'm really sorry, I'll rush back to the company at once." After that, they ended the call. Hans immediately asked, "So, what is she doing?" Ron replied, "She said she was with a client." Hans instantly jumped to the worst conclusion. What would a young and beautiful female manager be doing with a client? IR was evident to anyone with half a brain. Hans's impression of Deidre instantly hit rock bottom. And here I thought she reached her current position on her own merits. To think she's just like those other women. Hans looked sharply at Ron. "Tell me honestly, how did she manage to become the sales manager?" Ron's expression changed in an instant. What was Hans insinuating by that? Did he suspect Ron of fraternizing with Deidre? Did he think that was how Deidre became the sales manager? Ron flew into a panic and fell to his knees. "Mr. Chairman, I swear to God that there was nothing between us. She became the sales manager on her own merits." Hans smirked. "Is that so? Well, we'll know soon enough." He stood up and walked to the window. He was just planning to enjoy the scenery. But he just happened to see two luxury cars driving into the company building. The car doors opened, and Deidre got out of the red Ferrari. Hans was taken aback. Turning around, he asked Ron, "Can Deidre afford a Ferrari with her salary? Her annual salary is $560,000 at most. She couldn't possibly afford it." Ron replied. "Well then, come and see for yourself." Hans scoffed. Ron walked to the window and saw Deidre beside the Ferrari. He was just as stunned. Where did she get the money to buy such an expensive car?" Ron exclaimed. "She must have found a rich patron. That's why she didn't even bother coming to work." Hans asked Ron with a smirk, "Mr. Scott, are you still going to insist there's nothing between you?" Hans could already tell Deidre's character from the luxury car. After that, there was no way he would believe a single word Ron said just now. Ron had no way of defending himself now. He could only wait for Deidre to arrive to get to the bottom of the matter. Downstairs, Deidre and Charles parted for the time being. Deidre went upstairs to the office. As soon as she stepped into the room, she could tell there was something wrong with the atmosphere. It was downright hostile.